Case West acts as a direct sequel to Dead Rising 2 and helps to bridge the gap between Dead Rising 2 and 3. Just like Case Zero, it's a standalone Xbox Live Arcade game and therefore exclusive to the Xbox. If you're looking for the true Dead Rising experience, you're going to have to play Dead Rising 2 Case Zero, followed by Dead Rising 2 and get ending A, and then finish up with Dead Rising 2 Case West before moving on to Dead Rising 3, and God forbid 4. Case West does bring back photography and has a handful of unique combo weapons that will later get reused in Off the Record. Photography isn't overly useful, it's mostly just a way to add another achievement to the roster, but it doesn't really add anything meaningful to the gameplay. The majority of the new combo weapon additions aren't anything special, but a few are surprisingly fun to use. Just like in Case Zero though, your selection of weapons is extremely limited. You'll be forced to rely a lot on standard weapons like the security AR for the majority of the early game until you learn the new weapon combos, which are then extremely overpowered. Whereas Case Zero was strictly single player, Case West can be played completely cooperatively should you choose. The main player will always play as Chuck, and the partner will take control of Frank and be able to use his unique moveset. If you're playing single player, Frank functions as a persistent AI ally who will give you some light assistance and some occasional banter. This dynamic between Chuck and Frank is a bit lacking. There were a ton of opportunities for fun banter and jokes, and it's just not really focused on. Frank and Chuck have a kind of awkward partnership that feels extremely forced, especially once the story's all wrapped up. Case West is almost exactly 2 hours long in terms of strictly gameplay, with a little extra to account for loading screens and cutscenes. The scenario is slightly more important to the Dead Rising canon than Case Zero, but feels like fanfiction and doesn't add enough to the narrative to justify it existing. The entirety of Case West happens within the Phenotrans facility. It's an extremely sterile environment and doesn't provide many interesting opportunities for the player. Whereas Case Zero and Dead Rising 2 had stores with logical placements for tools and weapons and even external activities, Case West just doesn't have any of that. The Phenotrans facility is almost entirely reliant on forcing maintenance rooms on you for reasonable access to not just combo weapons, but weapons in general, and there really just isn't anything else for you to do besides run around and kill zombies. The facility is crawling with zombies though, in typical Dead Rising fashion, but it also has a lot of armed security guards. Usually the worst parts of Dead Rising are when there are enemies with guns, as it really showcases the issues and annoyances with the combat. The Phenotrans facility is filled to the brim with security guards, and it makes the entire scenario pretty obnoxious to deal with, especially when you're really just wanting to run between areas. While Case Zero had basically one main play area, Case West is broken down into two main play areas. You'll be going between these fairly frequently, which means a lot of loading screens. You'll be jumping around these areas multiple times to complete the cases and rescue survivors, and you'll also be forced to zone in and out of the shipping office, which acts as your safe house. The loading screens aren't the biggest issue, but it's much more annoying to deal with in Case West. The separate areas aren't overly large, but do have quite a bit of verticality, which makes them a bit more interesting and slightly bigger, but it's nothing overly special. The most egregious problem with Case West is the overall pacing. At the start, the first main cases have a good pace, then once you finish, survivors spawn for you to rescue as a way to kill time for the next set of cases to roll around. These survivors don't need to be escorted back to the safe house. Once you complete a task for them, they'll simply leave the facility by their own merits. This may be a welcome change for some, but it does feel a bit dumbed down. This sequence of cases, followed by survivors in waiting, repeats itself a few times. However, once you're finished the second to last set of cases and survivors, you're rewarded with a wait time of between 25 to 40 minutes, depending on how quick you were. Considering this game is about 2 hours long, this is a large percentage of time that's just dead air. Sure, you can run around killing zombies or doing the optional achievements. However, the mass amounts of security guards and limited combo weapon options make this a lot less fun or engaging than in the main game. You have a gratuitous amount of time to complete all the achievement-worthy extras, like photographing PP stickers, killing the various enemies, security camera shooting, and level up achievements while doing the cases and rescuing the survivors, so this extra time is really just not necessary. Of course, some players may actually need this extra time, as there is no alternative endings for Case West. Failing to complete the main cases doesn't give you an alternative ending, instead it's the same as dying, where you're forced to restart from a checkpoint. Case West lacks that standard Dead Rising staple of additional endings. You have to complete all the cases to get the only ending, which feels a bit lazy, especially considering even Case Zero had alternate endings. Unfortunately, there is no carryover either way with Case West. If you have a completed Dead Rising 2 save file with a maxed out level 50 Chuck, you simply can't import it into Case West. You always start off with Chuck at level 40 and you can't bring any costumes in. That also means you can't bring any of Case West's unique costumes back into the main game either, which is kind of a drag. At recommended playing, games either are ascended to the pantheon of games worthy of your time with a recommendation, or are forced to wallow in the miserable muck of mediocrity with a dismissal. Dead Rising 2 Case West is a special case in terms of recommendations. I didn't hate my time with Case West, but after playing Case Zero and Dead Rising 2, Case West just felt a little redundant. The new combo weapons can be fun, but the environment and scenario is really lackluster, and the dynamic between Chuck and Frank feels weak. In terms of actual story relevance, the events in Case West are nothing overly special or important. It doesn't add enough to the story to justify playing it for the sake of the full story experience. Skipping Case West and going directly into Dead Rising 3 will basically have no impact on your understanding of the narrative. Almost everything in Case West feels like a missed opportunity. The sterile facility and the terrible pacing and dead time in the final hour of the game really hurts the overall experience. It might be a more fun romp with a friend doing a co-op playthrough, but even then, the limited combo weapon selection and boring environment means you're probably better off just playing around in Dead Rising 2 instead for a more robust experience. If you've already played Dead Rising 2 and are looking for more or want the complete Dead Rising experience, Case West is a soft recommendation. However, even if you played and enjoyed Dead Rising 2, you realistically aren't missing out on anything by skipping Case West. That means Case West is really only for the most diehard of fans. Dead Rising 2 Case West gets recommended playing's most disgraceful verdict of not recommended.